I'm actually about to part exchange my Sony A7C II, and before I do so, I figured I'll just make a quick video and kind of go through my experiences with this camera. This is not going to be a technical review, it's not going to be too in depth. I haven't actually used that camera too extensively, but I just kind of want to give you my feedback on the camera itself. There's plenty of reviews out there when it comes to the technical specifications, and for the most part, a lot of it mimics the Sony A7 IV as well. But as before, I have decided to part exchange it, so there were a couple of things that I wasn't as happy with as I was expecting to be. But that could just be down to my own personal expectations on how I was hoping to use the camera. So first off, the A7C series is actually a camera system which actually makes everything a little bit more compact. So the A7C II is actually like a baby brother to the A7 IV. So it would actually share the same sensor as well as some other features, albeit in a much more compact system. But that's where the problem starts with me, is that I didn't actually feel it was that much more compact. For the most part, the body of the A7C camera is just more or less the A7 IV with the viewfinder lopped off the top. And instead they put a smaller viewfinder on the top right, removed the card slot, and overall generally made things a little bit smaller, but it wasn't that much noticeable to me. So when you're carrying around the camera, for me personally, I didn't feel it saved me that much weight. It didn't actually make me feel more discreet when I'm shooting my family or friends. So in those instances, I just felt, why am I carrying the A7C II? I may as well just have the A7 IV. The other side of it as well, because it's a full frame sensor and you want maximum image quality, you kind of need to have the full frame lenses. So you kind of fall into a weird position where you can actually get the f1.8 lenses, which is what I've been using, and they're small full frame prime lenses. But nonetheless, it's still much bigger than any APC equivalent. To top it off, to maximize that shallow depth of field that you would get from a full frame line, you would actually need to go to like an f1.4 and f1.2. If you was to drop it down to a zoom lens as an example, an f4 zoom lens on a full frame is more equivalent to an f2.8 on a crop. So my point is, you can't really get around the whole size issue of the camera. The camera, yes, on paper is slightly smaller, negligible in real life, but to have a significant reduction in size, that size comes from the lenses themselves. And with selecting alternative lenses, you're most likely going to be losing that wide open aperture or the focal length and so forth. So whenever I had the Sony A7C II wondering what lens I should mount to this camera and where can I bring it, I always just felt stuck between a rock and a hard place, and just why not just use my bigger full frame A1 or A7 IV, A7S3. I only held on to the camera as long as I did because for a while I was actually using it as my main A camera over here. Right now it's a Sony A7S3, and that is why I've got the Sony A7C II just over here. And more recently, I've actually purchased the Fuji X100, and this is the camera that I've been using as my everyday. One of the other things I wasn't really happy with this camera as well is its shutter sound. Because again, I purchased this camera in kind of like trying to replace the idea of getting the Sony RX1R Mark II. I have shot the RX1R Mark II and the earlier RX1 series, and the shutter on that camera is very quiet. And that's what I really love about that camera as well. It's a very small, discrete camera. And just to give you an example of what the shutter sounds like on this Sony A7C II, I don't have the Sony RX1 series with me at the moment, so then you just have to take my word for it and just trust me that the shutter sound on that is much more quieter. And because the lens on the Sony RX1 is actually permanently mounted to the camera itself, they're able to actually reduce that depth of the lens. But overall, in terms of autofocus performance, the image quality, the video quality has actually been top notch all round. But I'm in a different position to most people, I guess, because I shoot professionally, so I actually have professional equipment available to me. And that's kind of like where the issue was for me. But overall, those little problems aside, the camera is actually a very solid camera. It performs amazingly. The only thing I would just say is I just found it didn't really suit me. And that's only because I actually shoot professionally and I have a Sony A1, an A7 IV, an A7S3. So there's just not much need for a Sony A7C II because it wasn't small enough for me to justify bringing that instead over the professional stuff. The camera is smaller. It just wasn't small enough for me. But that is why I've opted to go for the Fuji X100. Yes, I'm sacrificing that shallow depth of field. Yes, I'm sacrificing low light performance. And as I said in my earlier video when I did the comparison between the two cameras, it's one of those things that if I'm thinking of my head versus my heart, the heart wants the Fuji X100 Mark VI. It's just more enjoyable to use. It's not as good as the Sony A7C II, but it is what it is. So I guess when it comes to recommending a Sony A7C II, I can't really recommend it. It highly depends on your circumstances and what you currently have. Just know it is a great camera. But if you actually have one of the bigger boys, I would actually kind of like urge caution with you spending money on the A7C II because the size difference isn't as big as everyone makes out online. But the best thing that I suggest for you to do is just try and live with one if you can. Rent one, go to the store and actually kind of like play around with it with your own hands. But I do appreciate in 2025, that's really hard to do when everything's online shopping these days. Just know that I have had the camera for over a year. I've decided to get rid of it. And I personally have decided to go for the Fuji X100 Mark VI as my everyday camera. Let me know down below if you've been interested in the Sony A7C II and whether you'll be picking one up.